6:30, and everybody's here, so I think I'll call the meeting to order. This is the November 15th meeting of the Eugene Budget Subcommittee. Primary purpose of the meeting tonight is to review and approve three service profiles. As we get started, I want to go around and do introductions. Before we do that, just a couple of kind of housekeeping things. I'd remind everybody that we're on public TV at this point. Also, the microphones that are here on the desk, as you may or may not know, are pretty sensitive, and so be careful rustling paper on them or whatever else that you might do, because they're pretty sensitive. Let's go around and do some introductions around this table. I'm Ken Beeson. I'll leave it at that.
I'm Jill Featherston-Ha.
We'll come back to Marty.
Hi, Marty Wilde.
Oh, you're here. Good.
Unmeet person.
I'm Laura Illig.
Bob Clark.
Hello, I'm Mark Rust.
Fifth-year senior, Doug Smith.
Chelsea Clinton.
And as we have the presentations from the city, the particular city staff people giving the presentations will introduce themselves. I guess the other thing to do before we get started, does anybody on the committee have any general comment they want to make or any particular question they want to ask? Is there anything from the staff that we need to hear generally before we start? Okay. The first one we have on our agenda is, write one out here, the municipal court service profile.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Perry. I'm the court administrator from Eugene Municipal Court, and I'm here tonight to just talk about our operation, give you kind of an overview of what we do, some of the current issues that we're experiencing right now, some of the programs we've implemented recently, and then I'll jump into questions, okay? So Eugene Municipal Court focuses on quality of life issues, so we really hit on the livability in Eugene, the thefts, the assaults, Deweys, and things like that. We don't adjudicate felony offenses, but we do adjudicate misdemeanors, which include Deweys, assaults, thefts, criminal mischief. There's a variety of things along those lines, and they're very focused on quality of life issues. We also adjudicate violations, which includes traffic, parking, and then animal regulations. So the animal-related fines that are issued, we see those in our court as well. We also have civil penalties that we adjudicate. Probably the biggest one that you've heard about would be the downtown public safety zone. That's a civil offense. It's not a violation, and we hear those in our court along with impounds as well. We hold juries. We have a 6-person jury, which is a little different than the circuit court that has a 12-person jury. Some of the sanctions and alternatives that we offer, we do have jail as a potential sanction. Any offense that's jailable, we appoint an attorney for. Currently, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but currently we have 25 dedicated jail beds for the court. We also utilize a work crew program through Lane County, and also another program is community service that Lane County allows us to use. We also have just financial fines that we impose on individuals for, most offenses carry, or all offenses carry some sort of fine, and a large portion of them generally result in some fine being imposed if they're, the person's found guilty. We also have a variety of diversion programs that allows the person to go through a program. It might be an educational class. It might be, even some alcohol program and that sort of thing to help them correct behavior and not see them again. So we don't, we focus on the avoiding recidivism there. Just some overview on our statistical data that's not included in the service profile, but it's just kind of a nice to know what we see. We are the largest court, the largest municipal court in Oregon. We saw over 22,000 new cases filed last year. About half of those are minor traffic, so you're just, your speeding offenses and violation of traffic signs and that sort of thing. The other half, a big portion of those are what we call the other offenses, but they're the criminal offenses. So there's a wide variety of criminal offenses that we see as well. In FY12, there were a little over 3,000 warrants that were issued, and a little over 3,000 that are cleared. Those are independent numbers, but that's just an indicator of the activity that we see. So the judge will hear a case, and they might issue a warrant for whatever reason, and in about the same amount of time, 3,000 of them are cleared. So that means the officer on the street serves them, or something happens when we talk about cleared warrant. Last year we had over 2,700 in custody arraignments, and so we hold jail arraignments at Lane County Adult Corrections. And with the recent addition of jail beds, which I'll talk about again in a minute, that's really increased our workload. Since 2010, we've seen over 500, and that we have one staff person and a judge that operates out of the jail, and so they've been very effective, but it is a lot of work to manage those beds. 2,974 indigent defense appointments, so that's basically the public defender, and that's a very important indicator for us because our contract with the public defender is based on the number of cases they see. So if we appoint a large number of individuals, attorneys, then we could see an increase in our expenses pretty rapidly. In FY12, we saw $2.1 million in revenue. That's down from FY11. A big reason for the revenue decrease is some legislation that went into effect that has impacted our ability. Actually, it's required us to report more of a larger portion of the revenue to the state, and so we're actually lobbying to change that. I don't think the state realized the impact, but we're working on it. Some of the programs we have available: Paso a Paso, that's held once a month. That's a Spanish-speaking arraignment. We have Mental Health Court. It's been a great program and a great partnership with Lane County. Individuals that have mental illness can be sent to that program. It's usually a negotiation between the city prosecutor and the public defender, and they'll go through and get treatment and so on, and it allows a person to get the right treatment, not just sanction them to a jail time or whatever it might be. We have a Violations Bureau, which allows our front counter basically to offer an automatic reduction for a good driving record. Bicycle diversion, that's a newer program we implemented with a local nonprofit called Gears, and it allows a person to go into the program, basically avoid paying their fine, and if they complete the program successfully, then they can go through that and get some education, and so that's been a very effective program as well. Teen drivers, very similar, and then we have a variety of alcohol and marijuana-related diversions that we can let people go through as well. We have a variety of contracts. The judges, we have 6 judges. There's a presiding judge, that's Judge Wayne Allen, an associate judge, and then 4 assistant judges. And those contracts, I should say, number one, they're all contracts, so the judges are not employees, but they're hired via contract. And we just set them up contractually. It's a little over $300,000 annually. It really has a lot to do with how much activity we see that comes in on their hours. Court-appointed attorneys, another contract. that we've done a lot of work with over the last year. We actually had I'll hit on that in a minute, but we had a pretty significant reduction to that contract, so we've kind of been reinventing how we do that work and been working with the contractor to lower our costs. Again, we have mental health court. There's one session a month that holds 40 to 50 participants annually, and as I mentioned, it allows a defendant to go. It's an alternative sanction to serving jail time, and that's a big plus because you go through this program and it really saves a lot on jail time. We can see a lot of people with mental illness that are just in custody over and over and over, and so even though it's not a large number of people, it really adds up to a lot of staff and resource time, and it's a good program. The contract right now for mental health court, and that's a contract with Lane County, is $50,000. Historically, it's been $100,000. It actually started as a grant. The grant went away, and we picked it up, but it was about $100,000 for, I'd say, about 5 years, and then through the budget reduction process, last year we cut it by 50, and now we're hoping to maintain that at the rate that it's at. We have inmate housing, and this comes up a lot. So we have 15 jail beds at Lane County, and they're at $117.57 a bed. And we have an additional 10 jail beds in Springfield for $75 a bed. There's a key difference, and the reason the beds in Springfield are less expensive is that Springfield Jail only holds healthy male offenders, and so at Lane County it's kind of the full service operation, and at Springfield it's very focused, and it's worked out well though. It's been a great partnership between both agencies, and we really use those beds in Springfield for sentenced offenders. So we bring them in basically to the county. We have the arraignments, they go through trial, whatever it might be, and then we'll often sentence them in Springfield. And the way that works, they don't get released early when we sentence them over in Springfield. So it's a very valuable tool. Again, we have the Lane County work crew 4 days a week, and it's basically road type work, weeding and different things, and it's dedicated for city projects. So it's actually kind of offers a dual benefit. So we have a sanction, an alternative sanction for a defendant, but then Public Works also can get some benefit out of basically a contractor coming out and doing work on some of their projects. Some of the current issues going on right now, or current events. The court relocated in May to a new facility, and I'll show you some photos of that here really soon. There's a case management software system that we're implementing as we speak, and that will go live in December, and that's going to create some significant efficiency for the court in the long run. Downtown public safety initiatives. There's been a variety of things that we've been working on related to downtown public safety. And then, as with probably every division that you'll see, budget reductions have been a challenge and a big priority over the last several years that we've been working on. So this is the new facility. It's on the corner of 11th and Lincoln, so it's just kind of down the street from where we're at. It's leased space. We remodeled the entire upper floor. It's roughly 18,000 square feet. It offers 3 courtrooms, additional space for the jurors, which we did not have at all in the old facility, and we had a little space in the old facility, but just significantly better space for our jurors, a big lobby space, and so on. And I'll show you some photos here. So this is once you walk in the building, this is the lobby. We literally had people standing in the breezeways at City Hall at the old facility, so we're very, very happy about how it turned out. This is our front counter. We've restructured this a little bit to be more customer service friendly. In the old facility, we had basically 3 windows, and then you kind of had to walk around to do more business if you had a collection account or a payment agreement or even parking. And now it's basically you walk up and you can go right to where you need to, where you need to do business. This is courtroom 1. This is our biggest courtroom. This is where we have our daily arraignments. We could put in anywhere from up to 100 people, maybe even a little more on a busy day. You'll notice the benches in the back, a little different color. We had those refurbished to match, or we had them refurbished to match the interior, but they came from the bankruptcy court. And so we actually got those kind of through a trade. And so we did a lot of things like that with the new facility where we reutilized existing materials or got benches and so on. And so it's a sustainable project. And so this is courtroom 3. This is actually the old bench from the City Hall facility. And it was in great shape. And so we moved that over, and we actually moved that over and set it all up, which it was an extensive process, but we were down barely a week, and we got that entirely. We shut down and got the whole bench moved and installed, and it was available the day we opened up, and so that worked out pretty well. This is the jury space. This is actually the jury deliberation room, so once the jury's set, they have this room to meet. It's a very comfortable space, and we're very excited to have that. As I mentioned, we're implementing a new case management software system. It's called Tyler Technologies, and we've been working with the vendor for about a year now. It's been a great process. We're very excited. It's going to really go to a paperless, or what we call paper-light process. We're going to do a lot of scanning. We're going to have a lot of documents that are actually created in the system. The person goes up and signs off on, for instance, a payment agreement. There's going to be an electronic signature pad. They'll sign it. They'll actually store the document in our system, and we can print them out a copy. And it has just a, I would say infinite amount of expandability, and so we're working on that now, and that'll go live, in a couple weeks. And so, some of the technology, though, you can see we've added extra monitors in the courtroom. The judge also has 2 monitors as well, because often they're looking at case information and they might need to see a document and the driving record and so on. And so we're really working through that to make sure they have the information available in front of them. And you can't really see it from this photo, but we put in a lot of thought to the new bench and the judge and how they can see data on the computer and still see the defendant, because what I've learned since I've been in the court is a very high priority that when the judge is speaking to the audience and especially the defendant, they want to make the eye contact and they don't want to be looking down and up and so on. And so there's a lot of thought put into the technology and the layout of the space. This is just our conference room, but we've built in technology in that room as well. We use that. That's actually a computer monitor on the wall. We use that just probably twice a day when we're working on our project. This is the front counter. As I mentioned, a person will be able to go up and sign on a signature pad. We don't have it set up yet, but there is a monitor that they'll look at when they sign. They have to see the document, so that's a pretty slick setup. Some of the things that we've also been dealing with, the budget reductions. We've had some FTE reduction over the last year. We had to eliminate a 3/4 time position, which has been challenging, but we've been working through that. The court-appointed attorney contract was reduced by $100,000 out of a roughly $400,000 contract. So we're really looking at their workload and how we set that up. And so they've been working, with us jointly to figure out how we can, save funds and still make it a sustainable thing, because we don't want to, reduce a person's ability to have an attorney. And so it's a challenging process, but we're getting to a point where that'll be a sustainable contract. Mental health, as I mentioned, it was $100,000. We cut it by 50 for this year, and then next year we'll have to renegotiate with Lane County on that. The work crew contracts valued at $174,000. Some of the downtown public safety strategies we worked on include the downtown public safety zone. That was recently extended for a year. And one of the provisions within that ordinance was that we will appoint an attorney, and so we're negotiating a contract right now. It's going to be about $15,000 we anticipate annually for the attorney on the exclusions. The additional jail beds, that was part, so the 10 additional jail beds in Springfield that I referenced, that was part of the public safety strategy as well. And one of the other programs that came out of that process was the Downtown Clean Team, which is basically a community service program dedicated to doing downtown cleaning. if you come by, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, you might see about 3 or 4 individuals wearing safety vests, and they can go out and work their fines off, or sometimes it's a sanction, doing downtown cleanup work. Some of the highlights of the service profile that is in front of you. We saw 324 defendants released early due to limited jail bed capacity. That's a critical number for us because that means those individuals are not serving their, they're being released prematurely before a judge can actually even see them, and that's just straight up because we don't have enough beds. At the same time, we have seen improvement since the Springfield beds have been added. We can send people over to Springfield, and that opens up space at the county. We had 506 defendants that did complete their sentence. Another statistic: 80% of defendants complete their Dewey diversion, and that's a great number because one of the things that's really important for the court is that we get people back, help them complete their sanction, get their license back, get them driving. That's critical for a lot of people to maintain a job and so on. Average number of days from plea to non-guilty trials 35, so that's a really good number as well. Somebody comes in and pleads not guilty, and then by the time they have a trial, it's 35 days later. That's a good statistic. Another one that I look at frequently. Percentage of defendants that pay their fines within 30 days is 47%. That to me is a big indicator. It's difficult to track statistics when you have payments that last a long time and cases that don't close for a long time. But that number, how many people pay within 30 days, that's kind of the window of when something's either going to go to further action or a trial or whatever. And so that's a good indicator how many people we see paying. 47% I think is pretty consistent. And one of the statistics I'm especially proud of is our customer satisfaction rate. We do an annual survey to defendants and the public, and we have consistently received very high marks, and something we're pretty proud of because we deal with all kinds of people, and they come back and they've had a good experience with the court, and that's what we want. So that's the extent of my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks. So we'll have questions, and as necessary, I'll keep a queue here of. So got Mark and okay, Marshall, Mark.
Well, thanks for all the information. I appreciate it. And I've been both through the Eugene Citizens Police Academy and more recently the county's Corrections Academy. So two of the things that stand out to me when you were talking about a couple of the programs that the city partners with Lane County on are the in-jail arraignments, I think, that you talked about, and also the mental health court. And I think you mentioned both of those, or at least the mental health court has been cut from the 100 down to 50. But would you say those programs are cost-saving programs in general, though, otherwise?
Yeah, the mental health court program, it is expensive per capita, but right. The people that are in the program tend to be the repeat offenders that we see and that have serious mental illness, and when we've seen when they've gotten treatment, they aren't in the system, or at least for an extended period of time, we don't see them back in the system. A lot of statistics, and Judge Morey's the judge that really runs that program, and she does a pretty nice presentation on the effectiveness of mental health court.
Yeah. The
in-custody arraignments, that's not really a contract. That's where we do our arraignments at the jail. The additional jail beds have helped a lot, though.
And do you do arraignments from the Springfield jail then as well?
We don't. We have to. We're legally required to arraign individuals in Eugene on Eugene charges. Now, the potential's there that we could do video arraignment. So if we had someone in custody in Springfield, we could set up video arraignment, and Springfield has done that, and so we just aren't quite there yet. So.
The two numbers you mentioned towards the end, I think one or two slides back, 324 defendants released early and 506 defendants completed sentence. Those I didn't see in the profile. I assume those aren't really necessarily directly relevant to the court, more almost related to the jail capacity issues.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
accurate? You wouldn't track those in terms of success of the court program necessarily.
Right. It really has to do with, how many beds are available and is the person staying in jail. When we say, your sentence is 5 days, are they staying 5 days? Are they getting released early? Or probably the bigger issue, we really don't see a lot of people once they're sentenced get released early, but when they're brought in, they're, 324. The bulk of that is people that get released before we ever see them.
And their release time served, is that right? So they never even have to come back? Or?
Right. So it's not like they got out and didn't have to do anything. We just, yeah.
Right. And then just lastly, it was curious to me, you mentioned at the beginning that City of Eugene is the largest municipal court in Oregon. How is that? I mean, it doesn't seem like a municipality that's much larger would have a much larger court. So why is that Eugene's so large?
I don't know, to be honest. That was information that was handed to me when I started, and I think that different cities have different structures. Some use circuit court, and especially up in Portland and stuff. So we're, of the bigger cities, we're the biggest of the courts, and we're members of local court organizations and stuff, and so we have a pretty good gauge on the other courts around the state. But there's I'm not sure how it was exactly determined. So.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I've got Laura with Marshall and Jill and Doug.
Thank you. So thanks, Jeff. Very interesting to hear about what you guys do. One of the questions I had on the first page of the service profile, it talks a little bit about how the prosecution service has changed over time. That prior to 2003, it was done entirely by contract. Then for a period of time, it's been kind of entirely in-house, it sounds like, or mostly in-house with a few outside contracts. And then in 2013, it's going to move in a different direction. Tom, can you talk a little bit about what sort of the fiscal and service considerations are that you've used in migrating that over time?
Well, that's more of a policy level decision. I'm looking at Christy. Yeah, because
That'd be great. Thanks.
But to be clear,
Yeah.
the prosecutor doesn't run out of the court. It's actually
Okay, that's a separate. Okay.
Right. So when we, Christy Hammett, Central Services Director, put the mics on. So the city prosecutor, in terms of the, used to report directly to me. So it wasn't part, as Jeff was saying, of the
court.
municipal
Okay.
court. And so the services used to be provided by Harangue Long, when we contracted with them for all of our city attorney services. And we found it to be more cost effective to move that service in-house. And so now, as of July, the city prosecutor actually reports to the city attorney, so Glenn Klein.
Right, okay.
And so we've just changed the structure. So this last change is really around structure and reporting relationships. But that was why we just found that was a more cost effective.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so Marshall?
On the note of the early, here's a question. Do they use house arrest or GPS tethers?
We've looked at some of those programs, but rarely have we used that. And generally speaking, those are negotiated between the prosecutor and the public defender when we have some kind of different things. But the house arrest, a lot of times, what we've seen is just more effective to have someone serve time in jail, and they don't always get the,
Not more cost effective, but yeah, it might be more effective.
You're right. It is. I will say we've explored a lot of different things, and we continue to do that. And so,
cost has always been
one of the available programs at the county is it's the ankle bracelet monitoring. Even though it is cost effective, it's still pretty expensive when you do it because it requires like an entire FTE to monitor that and watch it. And when you look at the jail bed, and there's some trade-offs. And what I've heard often from the prosecutors, there's a few opportunities to do those where they'll work well because you're basically saying keep this person in a certain place, but what's the purpose of it?
Sort of a related question about the exclusion ordinance. Was there ever a look at using, I know some of the critics of the ordinance have been concerned about the due process issues surrounding that, and so was there ever a look at having the exclusion be a condition of probation? I know there's some limits legally on what you can do, but was that ever discussed as a possible?
Yes.
Okay, and it was rejected apparently.
No, it wasn't necessarily rejected, but in order to be, based on probation, the person needs to be convicted or it needs to be negotiated. And so from a timing standpoint, the big advantage of the exclusion process is it's quick. And so they can establish that right away. And going through a trial and the whole process might be 3 months down the road by the time that actually happens. And it's a little tricky logistically to do it for the judge sometimes when they're, to say this zone and when something happened here or there.
But for the ordinance, are they actually being arrested or just cited initially?
Well, neither.
Or both? Okay.
They receive a notice to appear at the court. And so they say, you need to appear at the court within, I think it says 5 to 14 days, I can't recall. But basically, it happens very quickly. And the person shows up to the court, and then they can request a hearing at that point. And the hearing's actually set within 5 to 14 days. And then the judge will hear the situation to determine if they're excluded or not based on the one unique thing with the exclusion process is the judge will hear the case regardless of whether the person shows or not. So there's actually an additional layer that happens.
So I'm guessing from that description that the rationale for not imposing the restriction as a condition of release is that not everybody's being booked into jail and then released. That this process is just a paper process. Is that
No, sometimes often we'll see the exclusions come with, subsequent charges at the same time, but they're kind of two different paths. But we'll see a person in custody, and they'll ask at that point in time, do you want a hearing? And they'll set the hearing. The hearing happens at the court, but they could be in custody right away, and then they have them report to the court. Now, there is a percentage that we don't see that, just either leave or, whatever the reason might be.
A quick question on you said you had a bicycle diversion program. Is that just for violations, or is that for biking under the influence as well?
Just violations.
Just violations, okay. And then one thing I saw when I was a prosecutor was some pressure to take minor drug offenses and charge them as attempts in municipal court instead of charging them in circuit court. Some pluses and minuses to that. Is that something that's happening here, or is that not something that's been explored?
We've added some charges probably 5 or 6 years ago, but we haven't recently where, there hasn't been a big shift from circuit court to municipal court, but there's always this kind of constant conversation about that. Is there an opportunity to use our program? Because we have a great system, to be honest, and there's a lot of things we can do that circuit court can't do, and so we've had discussions about that. And I think EPD probably cites things, and they know where somebody's going to go. But as far as the specific charges, we haven't modified those in a while.
So you do diversions on, say, marijuana charges, but you don't have an active drug court program.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Lots of technical questions. You can tell I'm the lawyer.
No, that's
or one
great.
of the lawyers. I'm sorry.
Jill.
Thanks, Jeff. Can you talk a little bit about the work crew? And you said it's like $174,000 cost to it annually.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how that works, and particularly if you know the benefit to Public Works? So if it costs $172,000, what does Public Works get as a benefit, or if you know that?
Yeah. So the program basically funds 4 days a week, and I want to say it's Monday through Friday now, or Monday through Thursday. I can't remember offhand, but it's basically 4 days, 4 8-hour shifts, and it holds 12 people each day. And so there's a crew of 12 that goes out, and there's a sheriff. That's a big part of it, is the sheriff has to supervise them, and there's some, costs associated with that, the vehicle and so on. But, technically they're in custody, and so there's some real benefit to that. So they'll go into the program, and they'll go out and they'll do projects around the city. And so you basically have a 12-person crew working 4 days a week for $174,000. That's a really good deal, to be honest. And every conversation I've had with Public Works, who's here somewhere, they've been very, very pleased with the work and the effectiveness of the program. I actually just talked to them about it here, a couple weeks ago, and they've been thrilled with, just the productivity and what they get out of it. It's also beneficial because if somebody fails to report or if they have some trouble, they could be taken into custody too. The one thing that's nice is basically a day of the work crew, that's 12 people, is essentially the equivalent to one jail bed. And so you can actually get 12 people in that program for lesser offenses or wherever it might be applicable versus just putting them in jail.
Is there any capacity to grow the program? I mean, would it be beneficial, do you think?
Yeah, it's actually the county used to have 5 work career programs, and I actually think we got a little bit more benefit than our own. So we'd send a lot of people, and we paid for this, and we actually got a few more. And over the course of the last couple fiscal years, they've had to bring it back, and so they no longer fund their own program at all. And it's strictly revenue generated. So we have a contract, and I think like Short Mountain has another contract, and so there's only 2 crews right now. So it's limited. If there were additional crews, I think we would, to a degree, we would be able to use them. I don't know. I couldn't tell you exactly how much. We could look at statistics, but and there used to be a forest work camp crew that the county offered too that was great, and they could send them out and do some work, and that had to go away because of the budget, 5-6 years ago too. So.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Doug.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative. And being in a new facility, are you satisfied with the security setup that you have there, the physical security? That I mean, you hear about issues that happen in court sometimes, and
well, thankfully we've never had a serious incident. It is, that's, I think, in any public facility, that's a concern, and with the court, it's a concern. We don't have metal detectors. In order to set up metal detectors, you basically, based on what I've learned, it's like a 3-person security team that has to check people and brakes and all this sort of stuff. So it's very, very expensive to establish that. When we did build the facility, though, we gave a lot of thought to security and how that's set up. We do have a security guard as well, and the front counter, the lower half, the wooden casework, and all of the judges' benches are reinforced with Kevlar, and then all the glass is shatterproof, so if somebody can't throw, a chair through the window. And so there was a lot of thought to that, and there's a lot of emergency procedures. So if somebody were to go through a fire exit, it'll trigger doors to shut and do different things within the court. So it's a high priority for us, safety and everything.
could you explain again exactly your general fund revenue, where you derive that revenue from?
So where my revenue comes from?
Yeah.
Well, the bulk of our revenue comes from traffic fines. I mean, those are generally speaking the fines that pay most frequently, and our the rest of our revenue comes from the criminal offenses, which sometimes fines are negotiated in that process, and there might be jail time and that sort of thing. And so they, and frankly, they just aren't as, people just don't pay them off as frequently. And then we, that's about, roughly $2 million that we get. Animal regulations is another fine, but it's very, very small amount of money. We just don't see a lot of activity from those fines. And we also have parking, and I want to say it's around $900,000 in revenue and we see a lot of parking fines come in as well. So.
And can you honestly say that you get an objective review from your services from whoever you get those reviews from?
Pick out the person that we really like. No, yeah, actually, we survey. I'd have to look. It might even be in the service profile, but we send out a very large number of surveys, and we don't. They're just to everyone, and we'll get comments. Somebody might not be happy with the results of their trial, but the staff and how they were respected and the process they were very pleased with, and we see a lot of that. So I feel very confident about it, and it's been consistent. It's a open process to anyone, and we have this last year we sent them out in Spanish as well, and so we have a variety of ways that we get that information out. And it's a paper copy. I mean, we literally hand them out. We give them out to people. We mail them, and so it's not like electronic only, where you might limit somebody's ability to get on there. We'll send them out to random defendants.
Well, a really quick story here. My first experience with Eugene's Municipal Court was in 1967, and I was going out to the lake.
I wasn't there.
Well, too bad, because you would have gotten probably a good review from me if you were the judge that I eventually didn't go in front of, because I got a traffic ticket I was in my 56 Ford. It had bench seats back then, and my girlfriend and I were going out to the lake, and I got pulled over, and I got a ticket for driving while encumbered. Well, being only 17 years old, I didn't know what encumbered was, so I went home and I looked it up, and I was so embarrassed that I didn't show up. I mailed it in, and the judge sent almost all of it back except for like $5. So I'll never forget that moment, and I was really appreciative of the judge, and I was very appreciative that I didn't have to show. I could just mail it in. So I've been too embarrassed to stand up in front of the judge after I read what encumbered meant. So anyway, that's all.
Chelsea.
I have a question about the percentage of cases paid in full by the end of the month. Forgive me, I'm not an attorney, so. You mentioned the percentage before as being pretty good by your standards. I'm curious what opportunities there are for folks who can't pay their fines, or how they can sort of work around that obstacle in their life.
We have a large number of opportunities, actually. Payment agreements, I've kind of mentioned that in the counter and stuff, and so we work with our customers. If they can't pay, we'll set up an agreement where we'll let them pay a certain amount per month. I think the minimum is like $35, something like that. I can't remember. We have some sort of procedures along those lines, but we work very actively with everyone to make sure they can pay their fines in full. We'll also, the community service work downtown clean team program, that's another one, work crew as well, and we'll let people come in. They'll go, I got to get my license back. I can't pay. Is there something else you can do? And the judge will allow them to go into an entirely different program and not pay the fine at all and just work it off. And so, and then they have a calculation, $10 an hour. If you work this many hours, you can pay your fine in full. And so we'll do that. A couple years ago, we did an amnesty program because we had a lot of people that we saw that were, driving while suspended, losing their license, and just, with the economy and everything else, we did an amnesty program where we allowed them to basically come in. We gave them an immediate discount because there's a lot of, additional penalties that are added when somebody doesn't pay. And so we wiped those out and said, here's your one opportunity. If you pay it in full, we'll clear your account and get your license back. And so we did a lot of work. I can't remember, several hundred people did it in a short period of time. It worked out really well.
Thanks.
I have a very quick question. Are the fines, we were talking about revenue a minute ago, are the fines set by state statute, or is there opportunity for the city to adjust those if, to the extent we were looking to increase revenue there?
The presiding judge actually sets the base fine amount. And that is one of the things that we did last year. We increased our fines, honestly, pretty substantially to, kind of equalize what we'd seen, and there's some revenue issues and things with the state and so on. And so we increased our fines. They're just slightly higher than the state right now, but we do have that flexibility.
Okay.
The judge does. So if that comes up in discussion, it's always, it's a critical piece to have the judge included in that conversation.
Okay. Bob?
Following up on the revenue, it appears the past 3 years' revenue's been fairly stable, and yet we've got about a 20% projected reduction in fiscal year 13. Can you explain why?
Yes, that's primarily related to a state House Bill 2712, and the state modified the way. So any fine, I'll explain this. So historically, any fine that we received, we would we add on. There's assessments, and so we would pay a portion of those to the state, a portion to the county, and so on. And this House bill modified that procedure, and it basically takes $60 out of every fine and sends it to the state, and it's the first $60. And so there was a different schedule of how that was paid out. Now, like we mentioned, the payment agreement, we'll set up a payment agreement for $35, $50 a month. We'll get that one payment, and a lot of people walk away and never finish that. So that entire amount goes to the state. It's not a percentage of it or anything, and so there's a big chunk that just goes right out the door and goes to the state. So they've really, our revenue to them has, I'd have to take a look, but I think it almost doubled. And so that's been easily the biggest impact. I think that revenue decrease is a direct result of that. And we'll be lobbying again to change that. That's been a resounding issue across the state from all the courts. So.
Well, I can see why. It's $500,000.
Yeah. And my projections, it could go up to 700,000 long term. And so we have some old fines that are still being paid with the old assessments, and the new ones are coming in, and once that all clears out, it could go up a little more.
Thank you, Jeff.
So we need to move on to transportation. Does anybody else have any
I was just
particular
curious as a
thing?
follow-up. What does the state say they're giving the court for that money that you're giving them?
That's a political question. I don't, yeah.
Okay. So I would, if there isn't any more question or discussion, I'd like to ask for a motion and a second to approve this service profile.
So moved. I'll second.
Moved and seconded to approve the municipal court service profile. Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's approved. Thanks. So now we'll move to the transportation service profile.
So hello, I'm Matt Rodriguez. I'm a principal civil engineer in public works engineering, and Eric Johnson, who's a surface operations manager in public works maintenance, and I are here to talk about the transportation service profile. I'm going to speak very briefly from the engineering perspective in transportation, and then Eric will talk about maintenance, and we'll leave lots of time for questions. Okay. So the engineering division has a wide variety of transportation-related services. We handle transportation system planning, design, implementation, and capital preservation. Over the last 4 years, our predominant funding has been in the area of system preservation. The majority of that funding has come from the 2008 bond Fixed Streets. That bond measure was very successful. We had 32 projects in the original bond, and we're able to add an additional 22 due to low construction bid prices, as well as cost savings in technological innovations such as in-place recycling, which is where we can take existing road base, mix in cement, and create a cement-treated base that we can come back and pave on. That saves a lot of time in construction, impact to the public, as well as transporting the excavated material and new virgin material in. So it's a great process we've been able to utilize on quite a few projects. We're very pleased with the passage of the 2012 bond measure. There are 76 additional street projects in that bond measure. As well, there's $516,000 a year that'll be used for pedestrian and bicycle projects. Our transportation planning work group is working with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee to focus in on how that money will be spent, relying predominantly on the pedestrian bicycle master plan, as well as looking specifically at the street projects in the bond, because that's a great opportunity for us to get multiple objectives out of a project. If we're going to go in and repave a street, looking at what we can do to adjust the striping and also what we can do with the pedestrian environment to encourage multimodal transportation is a great thing. One thing that not many people know that we do as part of our pavement preservation projects is we look at all the accessible curb ramps along a corridor when we're paving. So we're able, with the enhanced preservation program we've had since 2008, to really cover a lot of the city upgrading and installing ADA curb ramps. Last year alone, we installed or upgraded over 350 curb ramps as part of our capital program. And Eric might touch a little bit on the program that maintenance has as well to install curb ramps where there are none around the city. Focusing a little bit more on accessibility, we're also working on an ADA transition plan in public rights-of-way. We have a current plan, but we're looking to make it a little more robust. Basically, it's a federal requirement to look at making our public rights-of-way accessible. Focuses predominantly on curb ramps, but we're also going to look at audible pedestrian signals. And the plan is really made up of inventory, prioritization, a schedule to implement, and then putting together a grievance process for the public to use for accessibility issues. Some funding challenges. With passage of MAP 21, the amount of funding for alternative modes projects is about 80% of what it was previously. So that, we've been very successful in the past with getting grants for our alt mode projects. So that will likely have some impact on us. In addition, the state has changed the process for competing for grant money. They're basically taking the federal funding they're getting and any discretionary funding they have at the state level and putting it into one pot called an Enhance It program. And instead of competing at a state level, we're now going through a prioritization at the MPC level, and then the Lane Area Commission on Transportation will have the final prioritization and ranking. So we're eager to see how that plays out for us and whether we're getting a similar amount of funding in for those type of projects. In addition, although we have the short-term bond measure funding, we're still looking for long-term funding to address our preservation backlog. And that bond funding that we do have now is for improved streets. So looking at how we are maintaining and going about improving our unimproved streets is another area of focus for us in the near future. Eric?
Okay. And I'm here to talk about the operations side of the transportation budget. Matt and I work pretty close, even though engineering and maintenance are in two different facilities across the city. We've worked very closely together in coordinating how we manage the city's right-of-way and the 533 miles of streets we have within the city limits. The operating budget currently is around $10 million annually. That's within the Public Works Department. 4 different divisions utilize that funding. The Administrative Division, Engineering, Parks and Open Space, and the Public Works Maintenance Division, which has the majority, about 70% of that operating budget. There's about 60 FTE that are funded under the operating budget. So I want to talk a little bit about
on the maintenance side, and just kind of recap what's in our profile to let you know some of the major programs and activities we have. Traffic operations and surface operations are the two sections within maintenance that have the majority of Public Works Maintenance's operating funds. And in traffic operations, the maintenance program deals with traffic signal maintenance, street light maintenance, street signs, striping and marking. They also have a technical section that includes traffic monitoring, sign and signal requests, plan reviews, traffic control plan review and approval, and our bridge inspection program. In the surface operations, we have the maintenance crew that deals with asphalt and concrete street maintenance, sidewalk and access ramp maintenance and installation, and our crack sealing program. Surface technical, which is under my section, also has a sidewalk inspection program, utility locate program, and the utility permit and inspection program. So as other users of the right-of-way are doing work, we also keep track and work with those utilities and other users to make sure that they're doing their work within our city guidelines and standards. And one of the big programs within our technical section is the pavement management program, which I don't know if anybody has seen this, and I would encourage you to take a look at this online. It's our annual pavement management report, and we publish it in March of every year. And each year we go out and rate all of our streets, all of our arterials and collectors on an annual basis, and our residential streets every 3 years. And we produce a report that gives the reader a general view of our street infrastructure condition. We run different funding scenarios to see where we'll fall out with the available funding that we have. We forecast in the future of future needs to maintain our streets. So this is a good document to not only look at our improved streets, but we also have information on our unimproved street system and our shared use path system too. So I encourage you online to take a look at this, and we'll have a new report, the 2013 report this March. A few of the programs I'd like to highlight is our, as I talked about, our annual pavement management report, and our enhanced street repair service program, which is better known as the pothole program, and we started that back in 2008 when we were trying to look at how do we deal with the pothole complaints we were getting here in town. And we found through our research at maintenance that 75% of the complaints we were getting were attributed to unimproved streets. We have about 88 lane miles of unimproved streets in Eugene, and they receive little to no maintenance. We just deal with hazardous potholes, which are 3 inches or greater in depth. And we were fixing on an average of several thousand potholes a year prior to 2008, and we decided that a good way to address these issues on unimproved streets were just to go in and do a maintenance overlay. So between Public Works Maintenance and Public Works Engineering, over the past 5 years, we've addressed 23.5 lane miles, or 27% of our system, unimproved system. We've improved those with maintenance overlays. Currently, or next year, we'll be spending about $200,000 on that program. In the first 5 years, we've had a little more money to put towards that program. We spent up to about $2 million on overlay projects, and that's that's addressed 70-plus individual streets or street segments throughout the city. A really popular program. The other thing with our road fund that we budget for, and we never know if we're going to be budget well enough, is our emergency response, and that becomes a priority for maintenance in public works in general. And those type of responses are any type of street failures that we don't foresee, our snow and ice response, landslides, and windstorms. So any type of right-of-way clearing, that becomes a priority, and then we'll have to reprioritize our work plans in other areas to accommodate those. So I think with that, we're ready for some questions.
So let's, we can go about 20 minutes with questions, thing like that, so we can kind of stay on track and be sure we're out of here at 7:30. We'll see what that looks like. But so I've got Laura.
Okay. So I have a clarification and then a question. So my clarification, I was just trying to make sure I understand where your money comes from. So if I read it correctly, there's some that you get from the 5 cents a gallon local fuel tax. So that's about $3 million, right? And then there's another $3.4 million approximately that's bond funding. Is that right? And then there's money from the State Highway Trust Fund.
So
Our share. I was just trying to understand how is your operating budget created?
For the operating budget, I'll let Eric answer that, but the
Okay.
bond funding's on the capital side.
Okay.
Capital and
Uh-huh.
operating budgets
Okay.
are separate.
Okay.
Our capital funding, we have about $3.1 million a year that comes from the local gas tax,
Right.
the 5-cent gas tax that we use for pavement preservation. We've got a couple $100,000, $200,000 to $300,000 that comes from the reimbursable component of transportation system development charges, so
Okay.
SDCs. And then over the next 4 years, we have a combination of the last piece of the 2008 bond measure, which is about $2.5 million in FY14. And the reason that's not just a fifth of the $35.9 million in that bond measure is we actually pushed work forward to take advantage of low construction costs. And I think we got a lot of benefit out of that. So we've got that last $2.5 million in FY14, and then the new bond measure actually begins to be budgeted in FY15, and that is $7.5 to $8.1 million depending on the year.
Okay, and those are specifically for capital.
That's for capital, and that's specific to transportation system rehabilitation or preservation, rather. We also have some funding, which is the improvement portion of transportation SDCs that goes towards things like pedestrian and bicycle improvements, matching the city match for grants, for alt modes grants, and a couple $100,000 that goes towards rehab work on our signal system.
Okay. And then how about the operating budget?
And that's transfer money from the state,
Okay.
gas tax and DMV fees.
Okay. So a little bit more volatile then.
Right.
Right. Okay. So my question was, you mentioned in here that there's an increased focus on integrating environmental stewardship and community involvement in your projects, and that has increased project costs. And I was hoping you could just take a minute and share with us what are the kinds of things that have, in both of those categories, what's an example of some of the kinds of things that have increased project costs?
So that'd probably be one for me to take. So more on the capital project side, basically going to a context-sensitive solutions model where for projects that are appropriate, you have a high level of input from the community. It's a great benefit to the project, but it does take more staff time, more project time to get something done, and ends up making your project costs higher. Not from the construction standpoint, but the upfront work you're doing with
The staff time costs.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then for the environmental piece, that's really around basically new regulation we have about doing work, whether or not we have federal funding, which has a whole different nexus to doing environmental studies. So, for instance, on a federally funded project, we're going to look at archaeological, historical, hazmat. We're going to look at threatened and endangered species. And we look at all that just to repave a street that's already there. So we may not even be working outside of the curb line, and we'll have to go through that level of environmental study. So a lot of that is regulation that's coming in.
Okay, thank you very much. That's helpful. Thanks.
Got Doug. Doug?
That's it? So I've.
All we got right now?
You got
Marshall?
15 minutes.
Well, first of all, congratulations on, I think that passed by like 67% of the street repair road fund. And, you know, I think that says a couple things. One, how important street maintenance and streets and roadways, how important they are to this community. But I also think that it has to do with the kind of input that you allow in the services, you know, whether it's your staff directly or to Eugene Sand and Gravel or whoever you contract with. And what I mean by that is I'll say my street, Spring Boulevard, was just completed not too long ago. So I took a walk up the hill, and the staff, and I think it was Eugene Sand who did that.
That one was Wildish.
Or Wildish. They were great in explaining what they were doing, and they didn't know who I was. They just figured since I was walking, I was, you know, one of the neighborhood residents. But you know, just the way they presented themselves and how they controlled the traffic and how informative they was and what they were doing, I think goes a long way in for people checking yes in those boxes when it comes time for you asking money. I really do.
Yeah,
and it's just not in my neighborhood. I've seen it in all this, especially on Willamette. They just were very courteous and kind and always had a smile on their face, and I think that goes a long ways. And they're probably following some of the standards you probably set for your contractors, you know, that you want. People don't like, you know, sitting in their car waiting, you know, a long time to get through so I think your lead on that was shown. What is MPC?
Oh, that's the Metropolitan Planning Committee.
Okay.
So.
And would you say that on the preventative maintenance side is the key in controlling your long-term costs? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, it's between 3 to 5 times more expensive to reconstruct a street instead of addressing it by giving it an overlay at the appropriate point in the degradation of that street. So the more money we can get into preservation and being proactive, we'll keep our costs down in the long term.
Is a large part of your budget dedicated to that?
So before we actually got the first 2008 bond, we were relying predominantly on the 5-cent gas tax and that small portion of SDCs. And in that program, we focused exclusively, except for very rare instances, exclusively on basically overlays. We didn't get into reconstruction because we knew the bang for our buck was in the overlays. But we also knew that you can't let streets that have degraded to a point where they need to be reconstructed, you can't let that go forever either, because it's not a pleasant ride. So with the bond measures, we were able to start addressing those as well. So that combination has worked really well in addressing the backlog and the needed repairs over the last 5 years.
And from the maintenance side, we're already starting to focus on streets we did back in 2003 when we began doing pavement preservation to make sure that we get the longest life out of those. So we have an aggressive dig-out program and a crack sealing program to try to extend the longevity of those streets. So,
could you go through just exactly, so everyone here is aware of what a routine preventative maintenance program actually does?
well, you know, we look
like
at,
you just mentioned, sorry for interrupting, you seal cracks with tar or whatever, but there's probably more to that than just doing that for preventative. What other aspects of preventative?
yeah, there's different types of methods that we use. You know, our Slurry Seal program on On the engineering side, they're doing a lot of slurry seals to extend the life of a street. On the maintenance side, we're doing crack sealing, and what that does is to stop the water from getting into the road base, and breaking down the road base helps create potholes and on and on. So from the maintenance side, we look at that. We look at trying to do dig outs where we're actually digging out bad spots and getting those fixed correctly, which includes fixing the base. So if we can get on those early, it doesn't perpetuate and become a bigger problem. So those are some of the treatments that we're doing right now.
And how about drainage? Do you do, keeping drainage open or
Yeah.
providing drainage? Or
So as part of our program for preservation, before we go in and do a project, we actually look at the complete pipe systems underneath the street. So often where you see the road sagging, it may be due, for instance, to a storm pipe that's cracked and material is being transported through that system. So we look at all those systems to make sure that they're in good shape, and if we need to go in and do any repairs, that they're going to be able to support the new structure that we put on that street. If you kind of want to think of the continuum of preventative maintenance, and probably should have brought that graphic, but there's kind of a curve of life for a street. So it starts up here, and as time goes on, it starts to go down. And as it goes down, maybe 20%, that's a time to look at possibly crack sealing if there's cracks, or even possibly doing a sealant, kind of like a parking lot seal. And when Eric talks about slurry seals, that's oil with basically some very small aggregate, and we can use that on local streets to fill in rough. Some streets are very rough. We call that raveling. You can fill that in, take care of that defect. You can crack seal and make sure no water is getting into the subgrade, and basically give an extension of that street. As you continue to go down the curve in the life of a street, then there's a point where it'll tip, and it'll just go down rapidly, and you'll get to a reconstruct fairly quickly. And that's, depending on the amount of traffic, that's probably 12 to 20 years. So there's an optimal point in there where you want to come in and do something like an overlay to keep kind of extending the life further and further on that street. So, the first things you look at are crack sealing. You look at other seal coats you can do to cover the surface to stop aging of the asphalt. Then as it goes on, you look at overlaying, and as it gets further down the road, you're digging parts of it out that have failed, and then you're digging out the entire street if you let it go too long.
is it cheaper for versus concrete? What makes you decide what you're going to put?
Yeah, so in general, it is still more affordable, definitely as a first cost, like the price we're going to pay to construct it, to construct out of asphalt. If you're looking at a life cycle cost, they start to get a little closer together nowadays, especially with the cost of asphalt oil starting to go up pretty rapidly again. But one of the techniques we have with the street is actually doing what we call long life pavement design. And we've really benefited from this now because in the 70s a lot of this was done. And at the time I don't think they really knew exactly what they were doing, but it's been a great help. And that's if you get a deep enough section of asphalt, cracking will actually occur from the top. And if it occurs from the top, you can mill that out, remove it, pave back in, and you have this indefinite life of a street. If you have too thin of an asphalt section and the loads are too high, it'll bend it and it'll actually crack at the bottom. When it cracks at the bottom, you're out of luck. Then you got to take out the entire asphalt section, and a lot of times you're also taking out the rock section. So when we go in and we reconstruct a street, and we do choose to do it out of asphalt, we're doing that long life pavement design so we get a lot of bang for our buck. We do also look just at context. So if we're going to reconstruct a street, some of the factors that go into that choice between asphalt and concrete besides cost are, well, can we shut this street down for a month? Because it takes longer to construct that in concrete. It's a great product, but there's that impact. And if you're doing it in a really busy commercial area, you have to be very careful about how you phase it. And intersections are a place we really like to use concrete if there's a lot of truck traffic, because it stands up to that stop and start of heavy loads really well.
Just one last quick question. Sidewalks. From the curb for residential area, from the curb to the homeowner's property, is the homeowner responsible for any defects in sidewalks, or does the city do those repairs?
The homeowner, under code, the homeowner is responsible for maintaining the sidewalk.
That's right in front of their
home.
property lines?
Exactly.
Okay. Good. All right, thank you.
So I want to get Marshall and Mark, they're in the queue, and then if there's anybody else, we've maybe got 7-8 minutes.
I'll try to be brief. I'm just looking at something that kind of looks to me like a bit of a conflict. I mean, it looks like you've reduced the pavement preservation backlog by about a third in the last 4 years, but then when you're talking about the bond, the recent bond, you say, while it provides significant funding in the short term, it doesn't address the long-term funding needs to stabilize or reduce the percentage of improved streets needing repair. So are you saying that downward trend in the backlog is going to stop in the future, or, I mean, are we on track to reduce the?
Well, the bond measure is definitely giving us a positive resource to repair streets. That's not, we're not saying that isn't true, but what we're saying is it's 5 years.
Okay.
And once 5 years is over, then it starts to go back up again unless we have some additional funding. So there's a long-term vision for stabilizing funding to take care of the backlog versus this 5-year chunk of funding we have to do some real good to reduce it.
Second, a compliment. Your staff has been very helpful in dealing with Camas Ridge parents, so they've been really responsive to their concerns about safety on 30th. On that note, with 4J doing a major building plan in the next few years, I know they've been focusing on siting schools and rebuilding schools on arterials, because that's good for getting kids there. Is your staff working with them to make sure their access issues are addressed? I mean, in particular, as a Camas parent, I think of the non-ADA compliant pedestrian overpass over 30th. But I know there are lots of other parents who are, the Roosevelt parents are concerned about accessibility. I know for whether Roosevelt's rebuilt at that site or another one, and I'm sure other parents are as well. Sure. So are we, I guess, looking for a warm fuzzy about us being at least involved in those discussions to make sure we're dealing with child safety around those?
So we're pretty actively integrated into the Safe Routes to School program.
Oh, good.
So we work quite a bit with Shane McRhodes, with 4J, and then I forget offhand who the Bethel person is, but our transportation planning staff is constantly working with them. We've had we're going to get our second Safe Routes to School federal grant actually here, which has we had a first one that we did 2 years ago that put in a lot of what we call rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which you can see on 30th a little bit further west from Camas Ridge, on Chambers. There's a couple that are going to go in on MLK and some on River Road. So those are some of the tools we use in the right context if it's multi-lanes. We also have put in a number of crossing islands, pedestrian islands, and things like that. So we try to work with the Safe Routes to School program and what the schools have actually identified as their needs for safety.
Thank you.
Mark?
So, one of your targets, or performance target strategy 3 talks about 100% of pavement preservation projects integrate multimodal improvements. Does that include the unimproved or non-city standard streets that you do improvements to?
That's focusing really, when we define our pavement preservation program, it's really talking about improved streets. And
Okay.
Then we have the pothole program, or enhanced pothole service, that looks at unimproved streets.
So on some of the local streets where, there's not even really width for bike lanes, I know at least one where you've done the sharrows for bicycles. Is that an example of integrating multimodal into that kind of overlay improvement?
Absolutely, and it's even things as subtle as widening bike lanes, half a foot or a foot, where we have the opportunity to get out to a 6-foot standard. So we have the pedestrian bicycle master plan, which really lays out the system for the city and where we have those opportunities. So taking that and matching that to the paving projects we have coming up is the first step. And then we look more in depth at what's actually proposed, and we go and engage the neighborhood and other stakeholders and how we really want that to look when we're done.
Okay, thank you.
Chelsea?
I just want to make a comment on that. And I know Reed from the city has visited the Harlow Neighborhood Association, has done a wonderful job in engaging us and asking us, are these appropriate streets, particularly for children to ride on. So I really appreciate his commitment to that and the city's commitment to talking to the neighborhoods to figure that out.
Great.
It's done very well. So.
Anybody else, anything that, other questions? Thanks. So I guess if there isn't more discussion, I'd like to have a motion and a second to approve the service profile.
So moved.
It's moved and seconded to approve the transportation service profile. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, we'll take that as approval. Thanks.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to zoning and nuisance administration. That was your password?
Say, wow.
It's very secure.
So it looks like by shutting the monitor screen, we have a problem.
Well, we could proceed without our illustrations. All right, thanks. Well, good evening. I'm Mike McCarroll, the city's permit review manager.
I'm Rochelle Nicholas. I'm the co-compliance supervisor, and I am recovering from a pretty lengthy cold, so Mike has nicely agreed to do the majority of the presentation tonight.
Yes. So we're excited to engage with you in a conversation about the zoning and nuisance administration program tonight. And staff in this service profile consists of two teams that are part of the Building and Permit Services Division located in the Atrium Building across the street. 5 staff provide information about Eugene's land use code in person, on the phone, or via email at the Permit Information Center. And they also review land use applications such as zoning verifications or code interpretations and variances. So our customers are very diverse from wide parts of the community. Could be neighbors or realtors, homeowners or architects. 3 other staff investigate complaints about zoning, nuisance, and natural resource violations. Zoning and nuisance staff determine if a violation exists, identifies compliance options for the person responsible, and if needed, provides a little motivation through either fines or abatement. And the code compliance team focuses primarily on private property, while issues in the public right-of-way go to our public works staff partners. So we do work closely with many partners in the community, including building code enforcement staff with the city, but also public works, police, fire, Lane County, St. Vincent de Paul. and the neighborhood organizations. So each day, staff in the service area recommits to being customer service experts, knowledgeable educators, and flexible facilitators as we try to meet our customers' needs. If we're helping someone with a general question about the land use code, we choose to enter into that conversation with an attitude of how can we get to yes with their goal. Or if we're working on getting compliance with the code, we commit to increasing the complainant's livability while doing our best to respectfully educate the responsible person so that same code violation won't happen again. Most of our time is spent explaining what the code says, what it's trying to accomplish, and then identifying options for that responsible person to get into compliance. So the service profile is funded through the general fund, and there is some fund revenue. About 5% of the total cost of the program area comes from land use application fees and administrative civil penalties, which are issued when necessary to get that compliance that we seek. So we'd like to give you a quick overview of the types of code issues that we're working with, and those were the illustration portion, and so you will have to use your visualization techniques on your own, and I'll just describe some topic areas, and you could probably have seen some of these items around town as you've driven around. So, but things that code compliance team works with, and also our front counter folks helping identify what the code says, include garbage is probably our #1 complaint. And we put that as a high priority and get to that as soon as we can because of the potential health issues. Junk is right behind that in frequency, and it can attract rodents and is unsightly. Unused vehicles are also an aesthetic impact to neighborhoods. The code requires all vehicles to have a current license and tag if it's visible from the street. We enforce on portable signs in addition to pennants and banners. Those are all listed as prohibited signs in the land use code. Home occupation standards are designed to limit impacts from businesses to adjacent neighbors, and one of the standards is to allow 1 business vehicle per home occupation. Protecting trees and natural resource, you can pictures of stumps, but that takes a significant portion of our time as we're trying to maintain that urban forest on private property that's so important to the community. Camping can create garbage or sanitary issues and really requires a more of a holistic community effort to try to manage that need that we have. The code, or there are provisions to allow camping in an RV, in the driveway of residential property, or in a tent in the backyard with other certain regulations. Animals, enforcing provisions related to animals often are quite an emotional issue for the animal owner, whether it's finding a place to take the rooster or managing a number of dogs on the property. Those can be quite challenging. Trash and yard debris carts need to be moved from the curb back to private property at least the next day after pickup, and sometimes we have conflicts with those being in the bike lane and really being a safety issue. Fences are limited 3.5 feet in height within the front yard setback and can't create a traffic hazard if they're in a vision clearance corner at intersections. And open vacant structures can attract transients and children, and really are a high priority item as well to make sure that people aren't going in there and being unsafe. Lighting standards, we have lighting standards that really require fixtures to be shining light down rather than out or up. And smoking. Recent standards were passed that really are designed to protect workers and patrons from concentrated smoke, especially in bars and taverns, but really all public places. So that's just a wide variety of some of the issues that staff are dealing with in the community. So the staff teams investigated almost 500 complaints, different cases last year. About 10% of those result in the need to issue a civil penalty fine, and appeals to the hearing official are pretty rare. So staff in the service area are really in the front lines for increasing health and safety and livability in our neighborhoods every day. And they also have a great opportunity to support our planning and development department goals. In addition to investing in partnerships with customers and community organizations, members of the service profile have been able to help with the long-range planning effort of Envision Eugene. And they've partnered with the Planning Division to provide their expertise and background in creating new land use code language that supports those Envision Eugene goals. Some examples that are currently underway are for looking at farm animals in the community and increasing the number of farm animals that you can have over the current code. Looking at, as densities increase, the compatibility of single-family residences, and looking at secondary dwelling units and alley access lots, and also look at downtown development and maybe not requiring some commercial standards that were designed for not in the urban core areas on the outside of town, to not be required downtown when it doesn't make as much sense when you've got that higher density. So all of those are currently underway. In fact, the Planning Commission on Monday has a work session for all three of those topics. So that's a quick overview of our program. And I'll just wrap up with sharing a conversation I heard last Friday. I was down the hall and around the corner, so it wasn't visible for the land use staff team, and I heard the very beginning of a staff discussion with a huddle, and it started with, okay, here's another start with yes opportunity. And it was like, oh, it was so nice to hear that confirmation that staff really were starting conversations about how to meet customers' needs with that attitude. And that's one of the main reasons that this work is so rewarding. Rochelle and I see team members that don't see themselves as bureaucratic code administrators, citing code and threatening fines, but we really see those individuals engaging with customers, explaining what the code means and why, or what it says and why, asking questions to use their knowledge and expertise to help meet their customers' needs. And that's our purpose, is to serve our customers to the best of our ability. So staff is able to contribute to the city's overall vision and our department goals of investing in partnerships and implementing Envision Eugene while improving safety and livability. So that makes it a little bit easier for staff to get up on a cold, rainy, dark winter morning and come to work. So thank you for your attentiveness, and we'll be available for questions.
Okay, let's see. Doug?
I'm envisioning $4 signs here, and over here, I'm envisioning 2. What happened to the general fund from 10 to 11? It almost dropped in half.
We anticipated you might ask that question because as we were reviewing, we had the same question. And so looking into that, that general fund revenue does include civil penalty fines as well as the land use application fees. And that percentage varies from year to year. It's approximately 30% of fees, the application fees, and about 70% of the civil penalties. And as Rochelle and I were comparing notes, that year we believe there were a couple of foreclosure properties where civil penalties ran for a considerable amount of time and the banks did not respond. And so that was a result of a much higher than average civil penalty income that year.
Well,
yeah,
that's all I have.
Mm-hmm.
Mark?
I have some questions. And so you mentioned both lighting and signs, and I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about the code provisions that regulate those things. So I just had a colleague the other day asked me about a new market out off River Road that has cigarette posters plastered all over it kind of thing, and he's like, isn't there anything the city can do about that? And I don't know if it's actually annexed or not. It may be in the county. But if you could just talk a little bit about the sign code. And also I was interested to hear that the city has a lighting ordinance to encourage them to shine them down or require them to. And I'm imagining existing ones are exempt or grandfathered in essentially. But when did that come into place? And is there any program to encourage people to update them so they are shining down if they're pre-existing?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the lighting standards, and those were adopted when Chapter 9 went through a major updating phase back in 2001. And so before that, we had kind of a nuisance glare ordinance. If it was really bright, then that was glare. And so we really refined that and provided some specifications. One of the standards is not to have really bright light in one area and darkness in another, because that's has to do with safety. And so to have more uniform light, but also with the overall goal of having a night sky in an urban environment, we actually could see the stars. That's a long-term goal as lights get replaced. So those are a couple components of that ordinance. There isn't a program right now to proactively go out and exchange current lighting.
There is not.
So it's kind of a longer phase as new development happens or as fixtures are replaced.
Sure.
The sign program has been around for a long time. The enforcement work that we do primarily on a complaint basis. There are some exceptions to that if an inspector or staff person is seeing an unsafe situation, like an abandoned refrigerator or portable signs on a sidewalk that might force people out into the street, that kind of thing. But if we get a complaint about either the number of signs or one of the prohibited signs, like I mentioned, pendants or streamers or portable signs, those are all prohibited signs, then we'll take action and look at that. So it sounds like, and you mentioned River Road area, I might just point out that through an intergovernmental agreement with the county, we do enforcement of most of these standards out to the urban growth boundary, even though it's outside the city of Eugene. So most likely that would be within our jurisdiction, and there may be some prohibited signs out there, and if we got a complaint, we'd follow up on it.
Are the complaints anonymous until they actually if they actually go to some kind of trial or something, or?
What we do is we don't take in anonymous complaints, but when we receive information, the complainant has the option to remain confidential. So that way, we found that that's really helpful for us to have that relationship with the complainant. One of our efficiency measures is that we can, without sending staff out to drive 20 minutes out to look, is the portable sign gone? We can sometimes just call the complainant and see if it's been remedied. And so we have that information. We keep that confidential unless there is an appeal or another situation that we would be required to give that information out.
Is anybody else in the queue?
No.
Oh, okay. So I have a question. So I live in this probably one of these neighborhoods that you refer to where University of Oregon's increased enrollment has created a strong market for new apartment buildings. And I know that in addition to lots of land use issues and trying to figure out how the code should be adjusted, I believe that I could probably call, is it Rochelle's team every day about code violations if I so chose. And so my question is, how do you guys, or do you work with the U of O at all to educate students coming in, new students every year, about the code? Because it certainly seems like a, almost insurmountable task to get so many of these kind of new kids every year to understand what the code is and how their compliance matters. Is that something that you partner with the university on at all?
We do. We actually partner with them quite a bit on different programs that we have at the city, whether it be our trash cans or not so much lighting and things like that, but more the garbage pickups and the parking and things like that. Staff do attend every year. They have a welcoming program that we do attend that, and if we've done in the past, we've done the door knocking and we hand out information. It's limited on what they'll take in and what they're going to read, but we are partnering with them and continuing throughout the year to work with them on kind of the hot topic issues of that time. But as you know, they're always transitioning, and it is difficult to stay on them.
Thanks.
Other questions? Mark?
I have more, if nobody else does. I'm wondering, just that kind of sparked a thought in my mind, if there's a way to try and use technology with students being, whether they're on their smartphones or whatever, whether it's, Twitter or send out e-blasts of some sort or that kind of thing and partnering with U of O. It's just a comment more than anything. I don't necessarily need a response. But the other thing you mentioned was processing variances. And I'm wondering how that works in conjunction if the variance is related to another land use application that planning is processing at the same time, or does that happen, or what's the dynamic there?
Yeah, and that's a good question. Variances are a land use application, but they often, once they're approved, they often are in concert with some kind of development. And so one common example of variances would be the garage setback. So there's a requirement for 18 feet from the property line to the door of a garage to allow for a full-size vehicle to be there without going out into the street and creating a safety concern. On steep slopes where the proposed house is going to be close to that property line, otherwise it's going to be on stilts farther away, that's a common variance that has been approved in the past with a shorter setback. So in that case, there wouldn't be other land use applications associated with that, but that focus on the land use code and that addressing the criteria with the approval would then later on result in a building permit application typically.
Marshall?
Another quick one with the revisions to the animal code and more people doing urban chickens, I guess, and other things. What percentage of those 500 or so complaints are related to animals, or are they a big part of it? Is it fairly minor? I'm just anticipating the conflicts in the future.
I would not say that's a big number. The biggest issues that we run up to is the roosters. So very challenging.
loud.
Yeah. So
Rooster, yeah, male chicken.
that's our
They
big.
get them by accident, right?
Yeah.
And then they don't know what to do with them.
Right.
That's why they have stew pots.
I get turkeys. I don't get roosters. I get a lot of
Enough of the wild turkeys.
Yeah, the wild turkeys, sir.
roosters.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just curious about it.
Jill?
Thanks for the presentation. So as driving around Eugene, I noticed the new apartments that are going up for the student housing particularly. I mean, they look so much better than they ever did before, right? And I just think they fit into our community in a much more architectural, pleasing way. And one of the things I read in your profile is that a recent amendment was approved for the multifamily standards to promote this goal. Is this what happened like several years ago about this kind of the short-circuiting permit process if builders were building projects with certain specified aesthetic requirements?
Well, generally with multifamily, again, back in 2001 when the land use code was looked at, that was the first time that Planning Commission, City Council got a lot of input on especially in those areas where multifamily is directly next to like single-family homes.
Okay.
How do we make that as compatible as possible? So that was the first really intention of some detailed code language for that, with articulation and other aspects. And so that most of the building that you're seeing going up even now in the last few years were with that group of standards. And so I think they have been fairly successful. In addition to that, the code does allow an adjustment review where if a designer has another idea to get to that compatibility, but not in that clear and objective way that the standards are laid out, they can go through that process and provide the compatibility in a slightly different way. So this recent multifamily standards that were just adopted is a refinement of that process to say, okay, what have we learned from the structures that are being built now and in these last 10 years, basically, and how can we increase that compatibility?
Is it shortcut? Isn't what I'm thinking of in particular is what the permits. Maybe it's not permits. I might be using the wrong words, but I think it's the design permit process is shortened if developers or builders implement certain features in the property.
Yes, we, as part of the building permit review for green building,
Yes.
projects that qualify as a green building through LEED or Earth Advantage, we do prioritize those projects for first review. And so we're able to get to that first review of their project, identify additional information that might be needed in a slightly quicker time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Maybe just following up on your comment there, have you noticed, is that enough of an incentive to builders to be LEED or Earth Advantaged, that they're going that direction, to be prioritized in terms of permit review? Or are they essentially all kind of trying to meet that now, and so it doesn't necessarily bump them up in line?
That's a great question, Mark, and it's interesting because we just, last week, were talking about how much of an incentive does that provide? And I think that is helpful, but you probably don't see developments saying, oh, that'll be enough for us to, we weren't thinking about green and now we will do that. And so we're really looking at trying to increase that incentive in some ways by either decreasing review times in a more significant way for those projects. But I think that our overall goal is that at some point we wouldn't need the incentives because those standards would become part of the industry and the way to go with the long-term benefits that they provide. We're kind of in that transition period and probably will be for a while, but we want to increase that goal and move that quickly on as we can.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Okay, thanks. If there isn't any more discussion or any more questions, we'll take a motion and a second to approve the service profile for zoning and nuisance administration.
I'll make a motion to approve the zoning and nuisance administration profile.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Everybody in favor, raise your hand, please. It's approved. Thanks very much. Does anybody have any general question or comment or anything else? Doug?
Attending the work session on about the city hall, there are implications from whatever the council's decisions are for the budget committee, and so I would just ask that the staff can keep us up to date with what's going on, so we can kind of look forward to that. Some of them look like it would have a fairly minimal impact on the budget. Some of them look like it would be a pretty big deal. So
we'll be sure to do that. And then on that topic, I would just like to remind everybody that at the November 26th work session at 5:30, Council will be receiving the general fund forecast. And you're all invited to attend. While you won't be sitting at the table, you're welcome to come listen in to that.
Doug?
Mia, do you have any idea of when Budget Committee will be getting together to start talking about the next fiscal year?
So at the work session yesterday, the city manager started the conversation regarding a financial strategy that's based on the general fund forecast that will be delivered on November 26th. So hopefully we'll be able to start providing you dates shortly thereafter.
Okay. And my next question is, it sounds like a lot of the discussion is going to be around new revenue. Is that correct? According to what the city manager was saying. Do we have just as much input concerning new revenue as we would a regular budget discussion?
Well,
By that I mean, I know we can't propose, new revenue packages or stuff like that, but it's certainly going to be a part of the discussion that's coming up. How much as a budget committee, are we involved with that?
Well, that is yet to be determined. As the city manager mentioned yesterday, he just started introducing that topic, and that will result in a council conversation, and potentially you might have a role in that.
And I heard him say December 10th is when he's going to start that discussion on new revenue. So maybe that's a council meeting. I don't know. It didn't say that explicitly, but that's kind of what I heard. Yeah.
One thing I know, just because they randomly called me, is they are conducting a survey of city residents about their preferences.
Mm-hmm.
So, to the extent you can let us know
Yeah.
the results of that, it would be nice to keep up on in case they do ask us recommendations.
We certainly keep you in the loop on any relevant information.
Anything else? Okay, we'll adjourn. Thanks.